Yo, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another episode of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. And now that we're 4 games into the 2023 football season, I think this is a good checkpoint. I think this is a good stopping point to look back at the 4 games that have been. For this video, I'm going to kind of draw on some of the things, not only from the Neil Brown era, but going back. And the thing that I've seen most after not only winning against Texas Tech, but also winning against Pittsburgh, so now West Virginia's 3-1 on the 2023 season, when a lot in the media and a lot across the nation, the pundits and the haters were saying that West Virginia was going to be lucky to win 3 games, or if you're Kirk Herbstreit, they'd be if they got to 5. He was going to owe Pat McAfee in some bet. So the haters are still out there, still not satisfied. But I would also say that there's a lot in Mountaineer Nation that aren't necessarily also satisfied. And that's puzzling to me because ultimately we want to win, but I just don't know if it's this cold, hard feeling that's been brought on under the Bob Huggins era in basketball, or, we're just never truly satisfied in any regard, whether if it's 99% A grade, is that West Virginia's offense is obviously not up to standards. And this goes back to a claim that I've made in previous videos, and it usually having to do with what would West Virginia look for in its head football coach. And that West Virginia is an offensive program. I mean, I think back to the modern era, the start of the modern era under Don Nehlen, bringing over Jeff Hostetler in the early 80s, which then, looked in the future, moved into Major Harris, to Jake Kelchner, Darren Studstill, Chad Johnston, who had an unbelievable throw against Pitt, Mark Bulger, really set the stage that then Rich Rodriguez, as we know, took it to a whole nother level, almost getting back to a national championship game, but taking Rasheed Marshall as your base and creating this new spread read option offense, and then taking it to its glory heights with Pat White, who was the perfect quarterback at the perfect time for Rich Rod's system, dipping back down under a subpar Jeff Mullins offense under Bill Stewart, changing a spread read attack to a traditional I-form offense, and that was ultimately the demise and the doom of Bill Stewart's time as head coach in Morgantown, is the offense. When you had Noel Devine, when you had Tavon Austin in the beginning of his career. But then ultimately, Dana Holgerson took all those pieces of Bill Stewart's teams, put them back into an air raid type of modern day RPO, Big 12 type offense, and got West Virginia to an Orange Bowl, and then having Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey, and then a few years later, Will Grier becoming one of the best quarterbacks in school history, at least from a talent perspective, maybe not wins and losses, but definitely as a passer. That West Virginia fans would rather lose 50-49 in a wild shootout in which they're highly entertained for 3.5 hours, 4 quarters, and lose that way, rather than win like an Iowa, or win like a traditionally Kansas State, or even though Utah's got a great overall team, Utah's traditionally a defensive-minded team. Alabama, back in its early rising days in the late 2000s, always known for defense. But Iowa's probably the best case example for that, is they're not afraid to win ugly. And so far, and throughout the Neil Brown era, we've had few blowouts. We've had few offensive, outpouring type of Saturdays where you look at the 2 best offenses, I feel like, of the last decade, and we're talking about 2012 and 2018, when West Virginia was ringing up 73 to 77 plays per game, scoring 40 points per game, passing for over 300 yards and rushing for over 150 per game on average, so 500 yards of total offense. Now, I don't want this video to turn into, an excuse fest of what's gone on over the last 4 years. I think I've done that enough in previous videos. But it's just to say that this offense is not necessarily, if you look at it in totality, even going back to 2019, this is not really what West Virginia fans like for in their games. Even in wins, it's the win the ball game with a in the 10th round instead of a knockout punch early with an offensive onslaught is not the way that Mountaineer fans like it. So I wanted to break down these numbers. And I was thinking all day on this topic of really what necessarily did the topic for this video be. And I think it's still, and this is unfortunately not the biggest of splash, it's still, I think, a wait and see mode, at least for 2023 with this offense. It's that if you look at the numbers, West Virginia was scoring on average in 2022, 31 points per game. This year so far through 4 games, 27 points per game, so 4 points below its average from a year ago. In the rushing department, it's outpacing last year's team. West Virginia rushed for 171 yards per game in 2022, 190 so far per game in 2023. Now, the passing yardage is where there's a difference. And if you look between a Geno Smith or a Will Grier offense, which was passing between 130 to 151 yards per game respectively, even 2022 with JT Daniels, who was probably the best quarterback, or better than Jared Egge and better than Austin Kendall that Neil Brown's had, 228 yards per game through the air is less, a whole 100 yards less at least than what fans freshly know in their minds from the heydays of Dana Holgorsen. And now this year, only at 159 passing yards per game. So I kind of want to put it into context. Again, I don't want to make excuses, but really, if you look between the numbers, and I've already read some articles, I think I know from the Smoking Musket out there, I read a good one today, who is very critical of this passing attack and very critical of this offense overall. But I mean, you'll look at it. Penn State, let's go back to that first game. Let's not forget it. 100,000 fans in the stands on a night game, a top 5 defense, a team that could very well make it to the college football playoff this year. And there were just a few 4th down passes that I feel like if either a different play call or play executions in those 4th down situations, and it could have been a very different game, a game that James Franklin needed to go for it with 10 seconds left to go in the game to cover the spread. Either way, it would have been a 31-15 type of game, so closer on the scoreboard really than the score indicated, I guess. The Duquesne game, again, weird one. 2-hour-long lightning delay in between when your offense or your defense just didn't show up. I think West Virginia was really trying to play some different guys, see what they had. Andrew Wilson-Lamp playing and starting that game at cornerback, seeing what he could do. And Neil Brown trying to figure out, who do I have at what different positions. I think that's been a feeling out process, honestly, even through these 4 games, 3 of which against Power 5 opponents. I think has this been a feeling out process to find out who are your ones, because there was a lot of, I feel like, middle ground between, your 1 to almost 3 on the depth chart at many different positions. So, Duquesne, they go out, they still score 56 points, would have scored 63 points had Rodney Gallagher not fumbled the ball out of the end zone. And then you take a look at the Pitt game. Again, your starting quarterback gets hurt on the 4th play in a must-win home game, or otherwise your head, as Pat McAfee would say, your head visor was getting ripped off your head on the field if you lose to Pitt. So your defense smells blood, forces 3 turnover. Phil Jerkovic is pissing down his leg, can't complete a pass. So you go ground heavy and you win, and you walk out of there with a win. Now, last week, you have an outer bands of a tropical storm hit your stadium, and you're playing with your redshirt freshman backup quarterback in his first start. So you can really spin this narrative any way that you want. But ultimately, I'm not trying to make excuses for this offense. It needs to be better. I think that this game, and I said this in the preseason, this is still going to be a run-heavy, run-dominant team. And I don't think there's any reason to doubt right now that 200 yards per game on the ground is not achievable for this team come 12 games into the season. Now, I know, and that's what I really liked about the Smoking Musket article, is later in the contest against Pitt, and then the same difference last week against Texas Tech. And that's why I think they didn't rush better, at least for C.J. Donaldson. You did incorporate Nico Marchiol on more quarterback-designed runs, but at least for C.J. Donaldson, that there wasn't very much running room. It's that teams are going to start bringing up their safeties, going to start bringing up their corners, load the box more and more to try and stop this running game. I think you have to still lean on it. I think this is as I said in other previous videos, the best offensive line that West Virginia's had in at least 5 years, maybe even going back further. There's a lot of talent on this offensive line, and they're going to have to be relied upon while this quarterback situation figures itself out. With Garrett Green, having this ankle injury that he suffered in the Pitt game and wasn't able to play last Saturday, and who knows if he's going to be healthy enough to start on this Saturday. And Nico Marchiol is getting his feet wet, getting comfortable running this offense, getting the first team snaps in practice. So that's what I would have to say is I think we still need to take a pause before we try and psychoanalyze all of these games. I think Saturday is going to tell a lot. I think the following game in a couple of weeks against Houston is also going to tell a lot, because those are both really two environmentally controlled type of atmospheres, even though it's hot, but it's not like you're trying to pass the ball through a rainstorm in the case of this past Saturday against Texas Tech. So I could really try and break it down to about 3 bullet points that I think that needs to be. And one other thing that I'll add to it is something that hasn't been said so far yet is the penalty yardage is down, especially on the offensive side. Only 7 offensive penalties through 4 games. You can count it 8 if you count C.J. Donaldson taking his helmet off after the touchdown versus Pitt. And ironically, it's been Zach Frazier who's committed 2 false starts and 1 hold of those 7 offensive penalties. So some illegal shifts, a few false starts. The hold is, as I just mentioned. The penalty yardage is getting a lot better, especially out of timeouts, especially out of end of quarters. You're not seeing those type of just head-scratching penalties that are really more alignment and calls, getting calls in types of penalties that we'd seen over the last 4 years. So I think the penalty yardage is getting better. Again, the rush yards are up, and we'll continue to see that as the season goes along, especially if they can start to get something going offensively. But what I will say, if I can break it down to 3 things, is the play calls and the creativity of said play calls. Like, I'm not going out there and saying you need to continue to run trick plays, multiple times per game. I think like what West Virginia did in the Penn State game, even though the execution was poor on the Nico Marchiol trick play, I like the effort at least. Maybe would have called that at a different time in the game. This past week, the trick play with Traylon Ray that set up the pass reception down the field to Cole Taylor that set up a touchdown. Like, nice, awesome. Whatever you need to do necessarily to move the ball down the field, that's great if you want to try trick plays. But I just think it was ineffective in the passing game. It just seemed like when West Virginia wanted to throw, it wasn't necessarily completing. As I said in the review video of the Texas Tech game, I think Devin Carter had his roughest game of his 4 games in a Mountaineer uniform. The play call at the very end to E.J. Horton down the field, I wouldn't have necessarily gone there fresh and in his first game, tossing the ball down the field that far. It just hasn't worked necessarily. I don't know if it's necessarily the quarterback or the receiver running the route. It's been a combination of things. But so far, the passing, and also, I know I love this. Other fans love this, is wanting to see West Virginia go more up-tempo. It seems like West Virginia had that really successfully going for them in 2022 against Virginia Tech. I remember that contest where they were just churning up yardage after yardage. Run play, Justin Johnson played phenomenally well, I feel like, in that contest because of the up-tempo offense. Unfortunately, Neil Brown likes to do more of the pre-snap motion. I don't know if that's necessarily to give his quarterbacks more of a read to see whether defenses are in zone versus man coverage, or he just wants to give multiple looks and they're just trying to move people in different positions. to disguise one sort of play call that the defense might come out in, switch motion quickly to go to hit another place on the field and go that way. But I don't think we're necessarily going to see that with the way that this defense has performed all year, and I don't think, or with the way also that this running game is going to be heavily leaned upon. So maybe we'll start to see that. We haven't seen enough of that in the Neal Brown era, so we'll see if we see it Saturday, especially if Garrett Green's healthy enough to go. Because, again, his athleticism is what makes him Garrett Green. The other thing is I think the cream rising to the top in the receiving room is there's a lot of receivers on this roster that I feel like are all pretty mid, trying to figure out, whether they're the one. And I know Devin Carter's been set and called by Neal Brown as the number one receiver, and Hudson Clement had the Duquesne game. Cole Taylor's coming on strong, and Preston Fox is getting a lot of snap. I know Cortez Bram came into this contest and had more snaps than he did this past week, but Fox had two receptions in this contest and still being used a lot in like 3 or more wide receiver sets. So then you have Traylon Ray, who's getting worked in, Rodney Gallagher sporadically here or there, E.J. Horton had the play in the fourth quarter that they went to him, and I'm already reading some articles today that Neal Brown wants to get him involved more so. I think definitely because of his speed. I think Jeremiah Aaron has so far been a bit of a disappointment, and where in the hell is Jashawn Polk? I mean, what was the point of signing him as a transfer recruit with only 1 year left of eligibility and paying him in NIL dollars, and we're not seeing him either at punt returner? I'm not criticizing. I'm not trying to take anything away from Preston Fox. In fact, I think he's doing a really good job. I think he's doing a better job last year, filling in for Reese Smith, who had his troubles in the punt return. So it's nice to have a guy back there who you can rely upon. I think that's why Jeff Kuntz, the special teams coordinator, and Neal Brown are sticking with him, because he's reliable. At least just go back there, call a fair catch, haul it in, start your offense. But Jashawn Polk not being used in the return game, not being used at receiver, I just don't know what the point was for him so far. So whether it's an injury or who knows what. I mean, the two Kent State guys really haven't, unfortunately, done anything for West Virginia this year. I know Montre Miller already done for the season with surgery, but yeah, no Polk. No Polk's been really a help, and you're expecting him and Jeremiah Aaron, I feel like, to compete for one of those slot receiver positions, but it's been Clement, it's been Ray, and it's been Fox who have been the ones who have usurped them, it seems like, on the depth chart and getting more opportunities. But if West Virginia is only going to pass the ball 20 to 25 times per game, you have to have your best receivers on the field at the times in which you throw. And right now it's just you're spinning a wheel and hoping it lands on a receiver who can come down with a catch, it feels like, at some point. And then the other thing is the back and forth between Green and Markiel. As I've said now, about 2 games each, it feels like a piece. I know Green really did start the Pitt game, but it's been a back and forth with the two of them. And this does really, I think, like after Saturday, you're going into the bye week, have to make a decision on one. Who do you want to go with moving forward, as it win or lose? And I think it would have to take something cataclysmic, for either by way of injury or just really poor performance, for Garrett Green to go out there, start on Saturday. Yeah. Either he re-aggravates his injury, or it's just a really poor performance for Neal Brown to even consider turning the reins over to Neal Brown or to Nico Markiel and letting it be his offense for the rest of the season. So as we get into this really like pivotal stretch, I feel like, for this team, because I mean, and you see it, the way that this defense has performed against Texas Tech, I think, is telling the numbers, whoa, this Mountaineer team can be taken a little more seriously. You look at the ESPN FPI since Saturday's game has now projected West Virginia to around a 7-5 record for the rest of the year. That's really, really different from about the 3-9 type of year that those numbers were projecting before the season started. So this defense is playing really well. It's keeping you in games, and defense travels. That's the nice thing, is that if you have a competitive defense, and obviously I think that is the mantra that Neil Brown has had since the day he was hired, was that he and the rest of the staff from Troy saw an opportunity to come in and be one of the defensive leaders in this conference. For a conference that has been traditionally known for its offense, I think there was an opportunity for the taking for a program to come in here and be a heavy-hitting defense, and West Virginia had that for a hot second in 2020, it seemed like, and then NIL and the transfer portal happened. It wiped out your secondaries, it seemed like, and guys were coming and going, and it's been a rebuild really for 2 whole seasons to get back to this point. So I like what I'm seeing so far out of this defense, and don't say anything about, like, I'm happy to be a defensive team and happy to win close, ugly football games. But I just know that that's not what the fans want. And to be quite honest with you, I just don't want to see it get to a point where the offense is the reason that West Virginia loses. Or, like, if you just could have made a few more plays here, I hate when one side of the ball, and that's what it seems like happens for so long with this program, is that one side of the ball is so dominant, the other side is just average to below average, so you can't ever get them paired up within the same year to contend for a conference championship. Now, I said before the season, I really do think that West Virginia is about a year away. I still think that the goal for this team is 8 wins, including a bowl victory or a bowl appearance, whether it's 8-4 and then a bowl game, or 7-5 and then a bowl win. So what I just don't want to see is that West Virginia's defense goes out there and gives you these awesome efforts, and it's just because of incompetent offense that West Virginia can't get a victory. So I'm fine if you want to turn it over to Nico. I think that he's proved through 3 games in which he's played predominant amount of the game. Oklahoma State last year, Pitt this year, now Texas Tech. He's 3-0 in that regard. And if you look at it, in 2010, when Geno Smith was a true sophomore, West completed 65% of his passes, 213 passing yards, averaging 2 touchdowns and around an interception. He had 24 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. So I don't think necessarily that Nico will reach those kinds of numbers now, even if he starts the remainder of the year. But I think that that's achievable. I think that he can average somewhere in the ballpark of around 220 yards worth of total offense. He really kind of did that already this past week with, or no, not really. He didn't pass for 100 yards yet, but he rushed for 72 yards. So you're getting his rushing yardage. You have an awesome run game. If he can give you a little bit more in the pass game, I think you got to get one of them going. So either committing to Green this Saturday, if he's fully healthy, see how he does, and if he plays well, continue to roll with him as your starting quarterback, or it's an opportunity to really take a hard look at it between the bye to then say, all right, here's what we're going to go with Nico for the Houston contest. So either way, I think that this is a really, really like watershed moment for this team, because I think now at a 3-1 record that Neil Brown has at least through October. I think to lose against TCU, I think Ren Baker and the rest of the university it's really Ren Baker's decision. Ren Baker would give him at least through October the Houston, the Oklahoma State, and UCF games to evaluate, to see if you have to make a move But again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I want to go game by game by game here, but I don't really necessarily I haven't liked, for now into 5 seasons. Really, the offensive scheme, the play calling, and it's just becoming a trend that these quarterbacks aren't necessarily developing to their fullest capacity. Wide receiver has been an ever-revolving door. I know at least at the coaching staff. I don't necessarily think, even for as good at times that Sam James and Bryce Ford Wheaton were, that they necessarily reached their highest potential at WVU. So whether it's a scheme issue, whether it's a players issue, I think that we really need to start to see signs of improvement in the passing game to become more of a balanced offense. And that's like, oh, holy crap, Carson, you're calling for them to still rush for 200 yards per game. So it sounds like you're calling for, the wing T again to come back, or we're going to run the ball 60 times per game. So that's fair. Like that's all fine. But I want the offense's passing game to be more efficient, to look like you can complete passes. Like, you can't have these overthrows like you had against E.J. Horton. You can't have interceptions where it hits a wide receiver in the hands, he tips it into a defensive back for an interception. You got to look like you have some sort of an idea of what you're doing in the passing game. Otherwise, you're not going to get to 200 yards rushing because these opposing defenses are going to pressure you. So I think that's what I have to say. I think it's just hold the phone. I think let's see what happens against Texas Christian University, TCU, this upcoming Saturday in a controlled environmental, I don't know what you're trying. Controlled weather. It's going to be hot, so guys are going to probably be cramping, need a lot of water. It's a lot different right here in like 60 degrees in southwestern Pennsylvania. So it's going to be a whole different environment for the boys in blue and gold on Saturday. So they'll have to overcome that. But who's ever healthy between the quarterbacks has to go out there and put together a solid performance. And if so, with the defense the way that it's playing, and with the run game, this line will be able to not only block for them in the pass protections, but they're road grading up front for this awesome running back tandem with Jalen Anderson so far and C.J. Donaldson, and then working in the quarterback. And I think we're going to be okay. So hold the ammo. There's no need to raise the alarm just yet. Even if this game goes back and forth and we get a high-flying scoring type of game and West Virginia loses. So let's just hold the phone on the offense, see how it goes for at least one more week, and then continue to see how it trends throughout the rest of the season, and everything's going to be okay. So I'll talk to you for the preview against TCU on Thursday. Hail West Virginia, everybody.